I'm Carrington MacDuffie. This is Starseeds of Freedom. And joining me today is a guy that I met through the Bitcoin community. And he's a guy who's been involved in a lot of different professions, really. And that's one reason I wanted to have him on today, because he brings so much to the table, so much knowledge and experience. And a lot of it, a lot of stuff that other people couldn't do or wouldn't know how to do. So I'm really excited to have him on today. This is Travis West, and I'm so happy to have him with me today. Travis, howdy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was going to ask if I have your bio, I have a couple bios, but people really like to hear from the person himself about himself, and I'd really like to hear more your story. I know a lot about your background from having heard you present before, but I wonder if you would start by telling our audience who you are in terms of like what you've done and why, like what you want to do, what you're trying to do.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm a husband and a father. I'm a Christian. I got a big family, four kids. I live in Northern Oregon. And I've done a lot, like you mentioned, career-wise. But the things that most people, when they t chat with me, they're more interested in the stuff I did with the service. I was an Army officer. The stuff I did when I was in law enforcement, which I just got out of law enforcement a little over a year ago. And that's probably the where most of my interesting stories come from is the law enforcement time. And then now I work in Bitcoin. I work at Swan Bitcoin, and um, that's kind of what I'm working on right now. On outside of my sort of like salaried work, I also own a hotel and I am renovating it. It's over 100 years old. And so I'm also doing that like weekend work. It's a 50-room hotel. And so I'm also doing that. So sometimes people will be interested in that. Um, but probably the most interesting stuff was like with my law enforcement background because I used to be a detective and I did mainly internet-based criminal investigations. So any kind of crime that involves the internet, I usually had my hands in those.
I bet you must have had your hands quite full.
Yeah, so in my area, we have a significant older population, and they're more susceptible, more vulnerable to like fraud, scams, that kind of stuff. So all of that, for the most part, is taking place over the internet. So if you're imagining like those phone calls you might get or those unsolicited text messages you might receive. A lot of times old folks will follow through with all of those conversations and reply to those scammers and end up falling victim to their schemes. And so that kept me really busy. And probably like half or more of those fraud cases would involve cryptocurrency transactions. And so I got really involved in tracing cryptocurrency, especially like Bitcoin and other coins. I got really good at that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I kind of made a name for myself, learning how to trace and helping with tracing. And then I was involved in a few regional teams that were like major crimes. So like if there's a homicide or a kidnapping or a rape or something significant, then I would assist with that. And I was the kind of guy that would come in like maybe the day after those happened and try to help out with things like tracing people's phones, trying to figure out if you or this, sometimes it's important to know where the victim may have been that day, or if you have a suspect, like where is the suspect now? So we can arrest them, or where was the suspect? Like, was the suspect at the scene of the crime, right? And so I would gather that kind of evidence, usually through phones, like the cell phone providers, the data they would have not necessarily the actual physical phone that the suspect may have still. I wouldn't really use that. I would just get records. I was really good at seizing records from companies and leveraging that in criminal investigations. So a lot of like Google and Facebook and Instagram and pretty much any social media service platform out there, I would get records from and try to often use location data to see if someone's at the crime, at the scene of the crime, right? That kind of stuff. So I was like that nerdy search warrant guy phone tracing guy on the team.
Oh, and are criminals as dumb as we like to think they are? Probably not. The cyber people aren't as dumb as some.
You know, in my experience, there were only a few fraudsters that were pretty good. And I would see their access, because it usually involves like some sort of unauthorized access of an account. Like they're logging into your bank account, your email, right? You have a bunch of profiles somewhere, accounts somewhere that have been compromised by these scammers or attackers. And I would look at those logs and I could see like, okay, this guy's covering their tracks pretty good. And I would just
Hmm.
kind of like, all right, hat tip. And sometimes they make a mistake, right? Sometimes they don't. But usually there's a mistake. Usually there's a lot of things are just unknown. Like, I don't think people really understand the extent of surveillance Google does, for example,
Oh, yeah,
on any kind of most Android devices, unless you de-Google your Android or any kind of Google service that you might interact with, like just using Google Maps,
yeah,
and it's navigating you somewhere. Like that's you using a Google service,
yeah.
and that data is somewhere in their records, right? And so, even using Google search and searching for things, like if something happened to you and you have a unique name, I'm probably going to do a search warrant to Google for a few months before whatever happened to you, before that event, and see, did anyone search for Carrington MacDuffie or her address? Because it's pretty unique. And if some bad guy searched with Google those identifiers, that would be pretty good lead, right?
Uh-huh.
So you can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I would leverage a lot of that kind of stuff. And, even like sophisticated scammers will not realize that extent sometimes. They think they might be good just because they don't have a Google account, but the Google stuff is so convenient. It's
Oh, I
pretty
know.
good. Everyone pretty much uses it. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot to leverage there. There's a lot of mistakes. There's only a handful of cases I got where I wasn't able to identify the suspect. A lot of times I'm identifying them, but they are foreign actors. So they're like in this village in Nigeria or India. And it's kind of like,
Hmm.
well, unless they stole millions and millions of dollars, that's probably the end of the trail, right? The end of the hunt. I'm not going to convince the sheriff to send me to India to track someone down, even though I might want to.
Hmm. And so how did your career in the military preceded law enforcement? And I see the how that transition would easily happen, and I know a lot of guys in law enforcement who have a background in the military. How did it wind up being cyber crimes? Was that related to what you'd been doing? I think you were infantry, is that right?
Yeah, I was an infantry guy, enlisted and then infantry as an officer. And I did National Guard. And so there was like a moment there where I was both. I was like a National Guard service member and law enforcement, like towards the end.
Oh.
Um, and so there was a little bit of crossover there.
Hmm.
But yeah, so good question. So I was like maybe 2 years as a patrol officer, which is kind of where most law enforcement officers start out. And I was more naive and just learning the job, more of a stereotypical officer.
I just can't see
Meanwhile,
you as naive. Sorry, I just can't see you as naive, but go ahead. You're talking about in the context of being a patrol guy, though, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're probably like a typical patrol guy or gal are probably thinking, I want to arrest bad guys. I want to enforce the law, and you're following procedures to the best you can, and you're just kind of learning how to do your job and not violate people's rights.
Right.
And you're probably starting out, in my experience, like it was taken very seriously, like constitutional rights.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of training on not violating people's rights in general. But, there's a lot of when I think naive now, when I look back, it's more like there's probably a lot of those laws that aren't constitutional to begin with. And so you end up with these like weird situations where should you even enforce that law? Because that is an unconstitutional law, and you enforcing it like might ruin someone's life.
Hmm.
And beyond just violating their rights, like you are also ruining their life. And so I'm thinking like every gun law basically is like unconstitutional in my opinion. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you will inevitably run into situations where you have to enforce something or told to, and you have to make that call and make that judgment call. And it's really hard to do as a young officer
Huh.
because you usually have a you're not operating by yourself. You have like your leadership, you're being critiqued for like the first year, and you're very more easily fireable usually. Like if you're unionized, you're probably not a true member of the union until like a year after, like when you're off probation, right? So there's all those kind of things to think about, but and it'll vary from agency to agency, but um yeah, so eventually though, I ended up just being I don't really know how I gravitated towards cyber stuff, but we were having cases that were fraud related. And so I would look into those because they're theft. And so it's all about, locating stolen property for folks. Like I did become more libertarian as I was, working law enforcement. I think
Hmm.
I remember telling you that at a Bitcoin Park in
Yeah,
Nashville.
yeah.
I was listening to a lot of Dave Smith and Michael Malice. I like to say that Michael Malice radicalized me, but I was questioning a lot of laws and the authority and like the real reason, like what are we doing
Yeah,
in law enforcement to do this? I
yeah.
was though at the same time seeing really bad, evil things occurring, and a lot of times it's really just law enforcement around to deal with it. I would see a lot of situations where I would have a hard time thinking a scenario where like the community or neighbors would interact or deal with it. Um, I'm sure there's some clever ways around that, that some anarchists somewhere have written about. But sometimes you have these weird situations where, it's just a lot of the times it's like internal family abuse and
Yeah.
just no one's aware of it. And it just somehow slips out. And you really have to intervene in the family's life to investigate it. And it's troubling privacy wise, but then
Mhm.
sometimes you do that and it's atrocious. Like the horrendous crimes you uncover sometimes, against kids, where you're like, those are like probably not as common, but you only need to see like one or two of those, and you're like, okay, this we need to be able to do something. There needs to be some sort of you're like, to what extent are you trying to detect evil and stop it?
Mhm.
And there's certainly lines, because I don't advocate for putting cameras in everyone's homes or something, even though you'd certainly stop evil and detect it. There's certainly lines, civil rights, and privacy to consider, but
Yeah.
when it's in your face and you're one of the investigators, kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, we're finding out, of course, people are finding out more and more how much child abuse there is, and it's high. It's really, really high. Um, Not to go down too far down that road in this conversation, but that is something I've followed a lot, and it's disturbing. And so, yeah, what do you do? Because you can't step inside the family, and yeah, where's the line there? As you say, you
Right.
can't have a camera in the home, but how do you protect the children then?
Yeah, and and a lot of crazy laws will get spun up in the name of protecting kids.
Mhm.
Like a lot of internet censorship, will claim, we need to protect kids from child sexual abuse material and exploitation and stuff like that. So it's used as an excuse a lot to go pretty far with laws and privacy violations. So it's interesting conversation for sure.
Hmm.
But yeah, when I really got into cyber, it wasn't really because of the any kind of child stuff. It was more just there's fraud occurring, and I wanted to be good at solving those crimes. In my experience, even today, most I think most fraud investigations just don't go very far. I
Really?
think I think there's a lot of lack of training, a lot of lack of interest. There are a lot of work, paperwork wise. There's a lot of search warrants and subpoenas usually involved who really want to detect the criminal. And a lot of times, the money that's lost, it's hard to justify the amount of work sometimes it takes. If you lost like $10,000, it might cost more than that, honestly, to really figure out and solve it. If you think about the salaries of everyone involved,
Yeah.
the investigator, the time, the amount of paperwork. not to mention like all the social media platforms will have to process those search warrants as subpoenas. There's so many analysts involved. And so there's a certain point where you kind of have to rinse your hands of it and say, you're on your own. You're gonna have to hire a private investigator. We're like, we're not going to spend. And there is an element where you kind of want that. You don't want like government wasting money to, do they spend ten grand to solve a case where $1,000 was lost? Like sometimes that doesn't matter,
Yeah.
especially if it's not even a felony. A lot of times the computer stuff is a felony, but what I also found out though is, so I started to do self-training. There's a lot of like resources out there for law enforcement that's free, like the National White Collar Crime Center. FBI has a ton of free training, and I would just sign up for everything free. Some of it was paid, and I would just study and study. I would take classes on cybersecurity and stuff, and I would learn about the internet, like what is IPv4, IPv4, IPv6, how does the internet work?
Yeah,
Like
really, how does it work? I mean, most people have no idea.
right. I would just really dig into the weeds on this stuff, and I wanted to be an expert at that kind of stuff. And so I got a lot of training, and I spent years just training and training. And I would do sometimes it'd be like a couple hours Friday at the beginning of my shift. I would spend, just doing this really nerdy training, and then the rest of it was like busy normal police work. And eventually, I got like a lot of credentials, and it's like, oh, I know the answers to these questions in these cases that are coming up. And a lot of times I was actually really surprised that not very many other investigators were doing what I was doing. Leveraging cell phone data for any kind of case was something that I didn't see anyone basically do until I
Is
started doing it in my area.
is it onerous? Is it just an onerous task? Is it really time consuming or is it?
It's technical
Yeah,
and it
okay. Yeah.
involves search warrants. And a lot of times, it's probably fair to say law enforcement officers don't like writing search warrants because they don't like writing reports. A lot of them.
Yeah,
It's very paperwork intensive and it's
right.
a little intimidating. You have to, know how to, you need to be familiar with the verbiage and the laws that allow you to seize these kind of records. And they're very technical records. So like you have to you have to narrow the scope of the records you're requesting. And so you have to have the training. You just otherwise you have no idea what you're doing. So, but what you're doing is you're requesting for specific records that you can then use and analyze to look. It's usually location data, but sometimes it's communication data. Um, Often it's actually communication data, especially with Google stuff, Facebook, any kind of messenger service that's not encrypted. Like you're probably able to seize all that.
Yeah, which is everything. I mean, even if it's encrypted, can't you?
Um, well, even with encrypted stuff, there's usually data on the users. So like if you're logging into something, right? Like they're going to have an email, user information, that kind of stuff. I might not be able to read messages, but I'll probably have like your IP addresses, like, you know, connecting to their service, their website, their app through a device. So what kind of device are you using? What kind of which internet service provider are you using? And then I can reach out to those internet service providers sometimes and figure out where was this person located at? Like, is this person accessing the internet from a specific home, a residence, a service? Like a lot of times it'd be a cell phone provider, like data plan. So like you're committing a crime on your phone and you're using your data through Verizon or AT&T or whatnot. And so I would just track you through that IP address usage and narrow it down to your phone. Like this device used it and it's in your name. I would get everything else about you, like with your Google, your Apple. I could see maybe like if it's an iPhone, I could see what apps are being updated and downloaded and used.
Right, right.
And sometimes those are scam related apps, like if you're spoofing a phone number, right? Like stuff like that. It can be really easy if you know how to like seize the records.
Wow.
And so yeah, it's fairly easy I would say, to identify the right people through the internet when they're committing these crimes, unless they're not making any mistakes and they're covering their tracks, which again only happened like a handful of times. Some of these like really sophisticated cyber attacks from like North Korea or whatever that you kind of read about in the news that involves tens of millions of dollars. I like to think that they're probably more sophisticated and they probably cover their tracks. But every now and then you read those stories and you're like, what an amateur. How did they get caught? Like, why did they make that mistake? Like, and
Yeah,
it
well,
makes me suspicious. Like,
the
because,
world isn't always what we think it is. Like you make assumptions about how other people are operating or the level that they're operating on, and you name it, it's going on out there, on on every level, seems to me.
yeah.
So, well, okay, I wanted to ask you about how you were saying that you became the more you got into law enforcement. Okay, well, there's like three questions in my mind at once, so let me back up. Were you serving in the police force at the time when all the defunding was going on?
Yeah. So I was in Oregon for a small sheriff's office around that time.
Oh boy.
And yeah, so they did the defund the police. Yeah, I remember that. So in our area at the time, it was not a big deal at all. Like everyone's very right wing, very supportive of law enforcement.
Hmm.
They wanted us to crush crime. And sometimes I'm talking like I'm still involved in it. That's kind of out of habit. I
Yeah.
do I recently just swore in actually as a reserve investigator, just to volunteer.
Cool.
We can probably talk about that later, but it's
Yeah.
very narrow investigations. But I so that's kind of why it sounds like I'm still doing it, but I'm not really doing most of this still.
But
But
okay.
yeah, the area here is very conservative, more right wing, and they just want the sheriff's office to crush crime, crush criminals. Like
Mm.
that's the reputation the sheriff's office wants. Like if you come into this county, you're gonna get prosecuted. We're gonna try to send you to prison. We're gonna try to catch you. Like if you run, we will chase. That kind of
Right.
those kind of vibes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's supportive of it. Like
We
we'll even there's been a few times where someone flees from police in our county, and we even have farmers running around here in
wow.
pickup looking for them. Like
Well,
it becomes like an event, a county event. It's fun,
hmm
and
hmm
we totally support
great.
it. So
There
that's
are areas of Texas like that as well.
yeah, and I admire it. Like I like that actually.
Yeah, the
But,
citizens are getting involved in protecting their own community. Absolutely, if there's cooperation with
yeah,
law enforcement that's been agreed upon. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you there.
no
Um,
problem.
so, so you didn't really see much of an effect in your specific area of Oregon.
Right. In my specific area, not really. There were, Portland's a few hours away from me. And so
Hmm.
Portland obviously saw an effect. And I remember they asked for assistance with like their protests and stuff. And we kind of saw Portland as this is your problem. You guys chose to work there, work for that community, and you get what you reap. Like that's how I looked at it. Like,
Do you
I don't
think that
care about what's happening in Portland.
did they come at it, do you think, with a uh, more latitude to begin with? And so that gave you even less sympathy for the situation they found themselves in, would you say?
Hmm. Yeah, people like me just kind of view those agencies in those big kind of lefty cities
Hmm.
as they're always doing some sort of shenanigans. Like
Yeah.
for example, they don't want to they'll have a tendency like a policy where they don't refer to inmates in jails as inmates because
Oh
it's
no. What do they call them now?
call them adults in custody.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought you were going to say like guests or something, and I was going to go, oh
Oh
no.
yeah.
Oh
Oh
no,
yeah.
we're really doomed.
But yeah,
Okay, really, adults
they
in
have
custody. Whatever.
yeah, so those are like the kind of agencies that will have those kind of sort of policies that kind of make you lift an eyebrow.
Yeah,
And you choose to work in those places.
yeah.
Like and they get paid pretty well usually, and maybe that's the motivation. But
Hmm.
I know like really great investigators and law enforcement officers at all these like, big agencies. But um I don't know why you would like voluntarily work in those places because they will answer to like city officials, right? Like a city
Right,
council, they'll
right.
be policy driven, like from the top down. and there will be review boards for all sorts of things that occur, and you just have it's just so much drama, right? And so
Yes,
I kind
right.
of just like I think if you're dealing with like all that kind of rage and protest over there, that's kind of what you sign up for. And so I just don't I'm not sympathetic, and they can quit. Like
Hmm.
I just don't care about those. Like I just view like places like Portland as just like a hellhole basically.
Yeah, yeah,
I just don't want to have anything to do with it. Like if I go over there for any reason, I'm like putting an AR in my car and stuff.
right.
Like
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
doing
Uh,
anything there.
Yeah. I've one of the guys that I've interviewed was a cop for a long, long time in Austin, and Austin, Texas was a cow town, and it's that outgrew itself and became I mean, it was always more liberal, but it just everything has gotten so extreme, right? And it's gotten really
Yeah.
concentrated in the cities. And so he was involved for decades and watched it change to the point where he couldn't move his pinky finger without dealing with the city council and how irrelevant everything that they were saying was.
Yeah.
And it became, he stuck in there, he hung in there. And that's probably, um, Austin, I think, was lucky to have him, you know.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
But he had a long history, right? He had a big commitment. And he'd been doing it. He didn't just walk in. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It seems like your job would be it would be very confusing to be an officer in that situation. Like if you're supposed to call inmates, adults in custody, like suddenly all the respect that's being afforded to people who've really not earned it for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions, but
Yeah, and like probably the more serious concerns that I would have had if I was working over there would be more like if your district attorney, which prosecutes crimes in your jurisdiction, they're like the attorney that does it, like on behalf of that jurisdiction. If they have the mentality like they hate cops and they want to crucify a cop, do you want to really be working in that area and like have anything remotely gray occur, which sometimes that happens, like, in a crazy situation. And if that prosecutor is motivated to like that's what they're gunning for you already, like that's not a good feeling. Like you might like if I we would be aware of attorneys like that, and I would be hesitant to go respond to a call there probably, like as backup. It's just kind of like, well, I don't want to, not like I'm anticipating committing a crime,
sure.
but if there's any remote gray area where they think they can get you, why would you want to even take that chance and fight? Because and I would have the confidence to win probably in the end, but you don't even want to have that fight.
Yeah, do you want to spend your life, any of your precious life in
Yeah.
that
That's
fight?
all that costs money, like for your insurance provider, for your agency. I mean, it can be. I've been sued before, in the context of my work there at the sheriff's office. Not, it's not fun, especially if people are gunning for you and there's statements being made that are not true, and it sucks to read about that kind of stuff, and you're like, this is not.
Right. And this is the kind of thing where you can't take it personally, even though it's affecting you so personally, because if you do, I think you would just go crazy. I don't know. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, you definitely can't take things personal in law enforcement. And I did definitely understand that, like by the end, by the time I got out full time, especially like with trials and court proceedings, all the attorneys know each other. It's kind of a show that they put on.
Yes, it's a
It's
club.
very
And
interesting.
don't even get me started about the justice system and what.
Yeah. And it can be funny sometimes. Like I did actually learn to admire defense attorneys. Like I actually I have more respect for them than most former cops, I think. Like I would have some come in like to look over evidence with me.
Hmm.
Because sometimes like evidence is really sensitive and you have to like show their investigator, the attorney, the defense attorney, the evidence. So like think child sexual abuse stuff. Like you're not going to just give them that in a
Yeah,
CD and mail it to them, right? Like
right.
you're gonna allow them access, but it's going to be very controlled. And I remember showing one attorney the evidence in this guy's in his defendant's case, and and it was kind of funny because it's not in the context of a court proceeding, and it's just him and me there, and the attorney's like, "Oh God," and he's looking at it, he's like, "I was hoping the victim was going to be a lot older looking." I was like, I know, dude. It's just like, I'm sorry,
Oh,
man, but it's not good. It's not looking good for your guy. And he's like,
right,
yeah, it's not
right.
looking good. So they can be honest, and they're just like normal people in those, and of course the guy's going to fight for his defendant still, but it was interesting to see that perspective, that reaction from the other side, right? It's
Yes.
adversarial, but sometimes it's really just only adversarial in the courtroom. And so like in between you can be friends even. And whatever happens in the courtroom is kind of just a show. And so once I understood that, I actually thought trials were a lot of fun. Like
Uh-huh.
kind of like you have because my script would be my police report. Like I pretty
Hmm.
much have to testify that and what I observed, what I remember and really nothing else usually, right? And so I would you have to really study your script. It's kind of like acting, and you have to put on a show, and you have like a jury or a judge or both, and you're trying to kind of win them over, and you don't want to come off as being an a-hole or unsympathetic or you want to be articulate, and you want to sometimes you have to like I would have a lot of technical stuff, so I'd have to like really make it so that like, my jury farmers can like really understand what I'm talking about. And sometimes if they're on the jury, they're like boomers, right? They're like, it's interesting, but
Hmm.
so you don't want to like overwhelm them, and you don't want to come off as like some a-hole or something, or
Yeah, or be condescending at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
or aggressive to the defense attorney or the defendant or something like that. I would have fun with it, but
And you don't know what they're, well, I don't know. I had a close friend who's a criminal defense attorney in LA for a long time, and I used to stay with him. And in the morning, I'd hear him all throughout the day on the phone, dealing with clients. And a lot of it was stuff like his end of the conversation and would be, well, okay, okay, is there anyone there who speaks English? Oh,
oh no.
oh, wait, your uncle? Okay, but who had the gun? Like this. And I'd hear these conversations and how he was trying to dig it out and find out what was going on and actually be helpful. And I doubt he could quote that much law. He was really good at being a mediator. And,
Mm.
you know, and I respected that he was trying to help, you know. I mean, it was
Yeah,
a
I mean, you
job.
definitely want someone helping because you definitely want to prove the cases, like if they're going that far. And most of the time they don't go to trial. Like there's just, if they're going that far, I would like to think, in my experience, it was, and it might not be true in every jurisdiction, obviously, but if our prosecutor was taking a case that far, like it's usually pretty solid, and there
Yeah,
is really questions
right.
about it, and they don't really have a chance. And you're kind of just making deals to avoid trial to save
That's
money.
what, yeah,
Event.
that's what I observed. A lot of deal making to avoid trials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But every now and then you'll hear about a case where you totally need to righteously defend it, and because they're completely not guilty. And I've been
Hmm.
sympathetic to those cases and have volunteered for those, even when I was a police officer,
Hmm.
like working with the other side.
Hmm.
In cases that I didn't work, obviously, but I just was sympathetic, like I'm like sympathetic to obviously like, any kind of gun case, pretty much any kind of gun case. Like obviously not like, you know, murder by firearm, but more like unlawful possession of a firearm,
Possession, yeah, right.
concealed weapons permit, or some BS like that.
Yeah,
Or if any kind of like money laundering laws, I'm not a fan of.
right. Okay.
Anything that has to do with regulation, I'm not a fan of. So
Yeah, yeah,
remotely anti, you're in trouble for violating some sort of regulation, and it's warranted as criminal.
right.
I don't usually care about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's not getting to the human element, really, of what's going on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
um,
yeah. Yeah.
so did you find, have you found, obviously we're Second Amendment people here, and I really feel like, what part of shall not be infringed do you not understand? It's
Yeah.
pretty straightforward. But did you find, I have a few questions around this.
Okay.
did you find that the people who had more experience with the firearms are easier to deal with, more reliable? Like, what was your take?
Um,
Maybe I didn't phrase that question
no,
very
I
well.
think I understand. So I pretty much the entire time I was law enforcement, I was very sympathetic to gun rights, and I was pretty extreme. Like, I think that's fair to say. I did start out being anti-drug, and I would enforce drug laws, and then I eventually changed my opinion on that over a few years in law enforcement. But from the get-go, with I was very pro gun rights, and I uh, I thought I was extreme, and then I transferred to a sheriff's office in Oregon where I did mo most of my detective stuff, and the undersheriff gave me a book to read called Unintended Consequences. I think the author is John Ross. I don't think that's his real name, but it's a great book, Unintended Consequences. I recommend reading it. It's very thick, like a Bible.
Hmm.
And I read it cover to cover, and became even more extreme. Like before that book, I was probably like, well, it doesn't make sense to have machine guns and explosives and RPGs. And then after the book, I was like, we should definitely have machine
We
guns.
should totally. I'm sorry.
I became way more extreme, and I was just like, and it's a great book. I won't say
Mhm.
more about the book, but I
Okay.
recommend it. It'll change your perspective on things. Maybe not you. Maybe you're already there, but
I think I'm
I was
already there.
very, so I did not enforce gun laws. So if I saw someone with a firearm on their hip, or a lot of times it would be in the context of a traffic stop, and they're saying, "Hey, just so you know, I'm armed, officer," or whatever, and I would usually joke like, "Well, if you don't touch yours, I won't touch mine," stuff like that. And it's usually I just even in the service, you're kind of used to like at least deployed, everyone just being armed all the time.
Yeah.
So it's really that big of a deal. And I like the idea of an armed society. I have a lot of experience with, I have run into a lot of people that think they're good with guns, and then you see them handle one, and they're garbage, and they're violating the gun safety law
Right.
rules. And it's just like, there's a lot of that, and that gets awkward, but that's another issue. But
But
yeah, I've
that's
always
related, though. I mean, did you see that a lot in your, like, not constituency, whatever, your area?
I usually see it when people are trying to show you their weapon,
Oh, huh.
and they're just handing it to you, and the act of handing it to you, they
You
flag
know they
people.
don't know
It's
what
like,
they're doing.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna leave you. Like,
Yeah.
come on,
Stop that right there. Stop.
so, um, yeah, and I wouldn't enforce stuff. And then every now and then, though, you'd be like back up on a call, and the investigating officers like digging into like, well, do you have a concealed weapons permit for that? And they're asking those kind of questions, and you're just kind of like, I'm not going to be involved in this. Or you might speak up or talk smack or whatever. Or you might encourage that officer in private to like drop it. Like, how far are you going to go? Because like they sometimes they are violating the law, and you're like, how do you tell a cop right there on the scene, like, hey, you shouldn't do that? At what point are you going to wrestle that cop down and prevent them? Like, probably not. But it's easier to say that you would. But you're probably gonna
So,
end up in jail if you do.
okay, this is something that's been coming up a lot in my mind because we have constitutional carry in
Yeah.
Texas, right? In a lot of states. I don't know, but is that the case in Oregon?
So Oregon has okay gun laws,
Uh-huh.
but we do require a concealed handgun license. So it really only comes into effect like when you are traveling with a car. Like if you don't have a concealed handgun license in Oregon, it's kind of hard to travel in the car because then it's like, what are the rules? Can I have it on my hip? Do I have to have it locked? Do I have to have the
Right.
ammo separated? It gets really confusing. Most people
Right.
don't. I actually don't know the answer to that because I just
Right.
don't
Okay.
care about the laws that much. But what happens in Oregon is every couple years there will be a bill that the people will vote, and it will. This last one was Measure 114, I think, and it passed by like 51% majority, so barely majority. And it was like the most strictest gun control bill in the nation. And so it was literally a situation where the small majority voted to just strip away everyone's gun rights, 100% of the people's gun rights. Like that's essentially what it was.
Mm.
And I remember, like for example, one component of it was if your weapon could carry a magazine that could carry more than 10 rounds,
Oh,
like,
yes.
which is almost every handgun.
Yeah, I
Like,
followed this pretty closely. I was like, you have
yeah.
got to be
And
kidding
actually,
me.
so my sheriff at the time is the one that sued the state of Oregon over this.
Hmm.
And there was another lawsuit at the state level.
Hmm.
But yes, there's a few lawsuits over that, and it got stopped. But that's an example. So that is what we have to face in Oregon. We have this huge liberal population that tries to democratically strip the rights away of other folks.
Right.
And it's kind of like I'm not going to let that happen. Like I'm not a fan of democracy for that reason. Like
Yes, yes, exactly.
have the
Yeah,
majority. I kind of believe in right and wrong, and the majority can get it wrong
yeah.
all the time.
Well, mob
So
rule, right?
exactly. So yeah, that's what we have to. That's the struggle in Oregon. Again, my county pretty solid, pretty extreme. A lot of gun ownership, but the state is a problem. Sure.
And that's the population in the city, right? And Portland is really the city.
That's probably true for most of our states. You just
Yeah,
have really big blue population centers
yeah.
have have a lot of sway politically because of their numbers, and it's unfortunate. My county is one of the ones that it's trying to separate and join Idaho, the
Oh,
greater.
yeah. So the greater Idaho, and it's ironic. I just interviewed a senator from Oregon, a state senator, a few days ago, Kim Thatcher.
Oh
She's
yeah,
in, I want to say Marion County. Is that?
I'm not sure. I recognize her name, but I'm not.
Okay, she's awesome. Anyway, I was wondering where that project was at and if it really has legs. She didn't seem to think so, but
I'm not really following it, but my uneducated impression is that it's probably far away to impossible.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I liked it just because the messages sound like to our capital in Oregon, to Salem, to Portland, to like we don't want to be with you guys.
right,
We have different values.
right,
Put it that way.
yeah. It's not nothing personal. It's just
Yeah,
like
well, and those folks with those other values that I'm referring to, they happen to like to solve all of my problems with the state. And so they can't just leave us alone.
right. Well, that's that basic difference between self-reliance and whatever you want to call the other thing, you know,
Yeah.
um, babysitting. I don't know.
Yeah.
So So, and now you're doing, now you're a reserve investigator,
Yeah.
which is, tell me about that. You were saying it's a narrower scope or just
Yeah.
involvement or,
So I used to do a thing where I would dabble in online undercover missions. So I would just have a bunch of fake profiles out there, decoy profiles, and a lot of times it would be in the form of maybe like one day every few months, a bunch of the detectives would get together and we would have a bunch of decoys and we would try to lure. We were basically scammers. Like we are trying to find online predators, men usually, that are trying to target kids. They're trying to develop a relationship online with a child. And when I say child, it's usually like under 15 is what we would go with. And they think they're interacting with the child and they're trying to interact with the child for sexual reasons and they are trying to meet up with the child. And then they get surprised when someone like me opens the door. So it's like sort of to catch a predator type missions. And
Mhm.
so those are like really righteous and cool, and I missed them. And I had missed them. I
Yeah,
was good at them,
yeah.
and some of my old leadership reached out and was like, "We would love it if you could do these still." And I was like, I thought about it for a few weeks, talked to the wife, friends, prayed about it, and I was just like, "Okay, I'll do it."
Hmm.
So I have a lot of ideas on how to make it better. And yeah, we could probably talk in the future about how it goes, but
Okay,
I'm
yes, I'm very interested
saying
in that.
need hardware. So
Mm,
we have like a small budget to throw at it actually for
mm,
new computers and phones. And it's interesting because to have like successful decoys, you're essentially like I would have to essentially fool all these social media companies. I
right.
need I need them to think I'm a 14-year-old so I can have like a Facebook account. And I'm all on these dating apps or Reddit or whatever, right? Where people go to hunt for kids. Like I want to be a kid there. So I'm fooling them. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse with that. And then at the same time, you're like hunting. for these predators. And so you're usually like fishing, a lot of fishing analogies with this kind of work. You're fishing for the predators in those kind of ponds while you're also trying not to get detected. And then you want to transition them to like some messaging app. Ideally one that can like just straight up text messaging is like
Yeah,
the
so you
best.
can nail them. So you can.
Well, no one will stop us. Like, or like a messaging service that's encrypted where no one will stop us. Like, you don't have someone monitoring for child abuse. 'Cause,
Right.
from their perspective, we're a child. So
There's
they're
no oversight.
understandably, yeah, they're understandably going to close my account down because
Yeah.
I'm like an at-risk youth that's talking to some man. So
Yeah.
they are going to shut me down. They are going to report me to whatever, to law enforcement maybe or Nick Nick. And so we're gonna try to now that I can like just focus on this, and this is just volunteer, so I'm not getting paid by him or anything. I'm just gonna do it because it's fun and it seems like a good thing because you really even if I catch like one really bad guy every 3 months, like that's
Yeah.
great for the
That's a
community.
huge contribution. I mean, it's a really big, serious problem. I think everyone is getting sort of blown away by how common it is. Like, did we know half the world was kind of psychopathic when it
Yeah.
comes to this?
And I don't know the numbers, but I know that I never did a sting and we didn't catch someone. I'll
Really?
And it kind of depends on like how you do your decoys, but so sometimes like I would pretend to be an escort and then I would tease that I have a child with me that I'm trafficking and then we'd get those guys. And so a lot of times like the numbers would be you might have hundreds of people communicating with you, but they think you're an adult escort, so it's not the same thing. And those aren't really the guys we're hunting for. We want the guys that they learn about the kid, they're excited, and they continue to talk. Like those are the guys. So that's a smaller number for sure. We
Yes.
have people give us
Right.
crap sometimes when they learn that we're literally like not literally, but as far as they can tell, we're literally trafficking a child. Sometimes they would like, I never had anyone call the cops on me though. I always wanted to see if that happens. Like if they know where you are and they're like that concerned, it would be kind of awkward call because it's kind of like, hey, I was trying to solicit a prostitute and I came across something even worse, like whatever.
Whoa.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I'm gonna dabble in,
Hmm. Hmm.
maybe every quarter do like a mission or something. It'll be interesting and I'll have a bunch of, a lot of the work is just maintaining the decoy profiles because you want stuff with history. You want like a Snapchat account with a high snap score. You want Reddit karma, right? You want
And, mhm.
to look real.
And what
Uh,
about, isn't there a timeline to that as well? It can't just suddenly appear. It should have a history.
it can vary. It can vary. So you can
Okay.
get away with like new stuff
Huh.
because you're kind of like it kind of depends on how you're hunting, but because sometimes there are scenarios where you're like you pretend to be a mom and you're trying to hook up your kid, like teach them about sex, like those kind of like crazy, really horrible moms that do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. They're out there.
Yeah, they are out there.
Yeah.
You're pretending to be one of those, like a bad mommy kind of situation,
Hmm.
and so you might know and portray yourself as I know this is illegal, and so you're using burner accounts, and that would be like a good reason why you have like low activity on your account. So if you're like posting on Reddit or Craigslist about this,
Right.
it'll actually probably will get shut down really fast on those platforms, but you only need a few people to see it that are interested and they text you and now you're off that platform. It doesn't matter that it got removed.
Yeah.
You're chatting with someone that thinks you're a bad mommy and you continue the conversation. Yeah, it's dark, but and we're very, very it's definitely we don't even go near entrapment with these, just so you know. Like
Oh, right.
I
Hmm.
would stand by any of these cases. Like I actually 'cause sometimes you have to deal with the family members and they're like sympathetic to their family member defendant, obviously, and they're like believing all their lies usually. And I would usually encourage like, hey, just read the transcript and come back and talk to me. Like, or if you read these transcripts of what they said, I mean, it's like I haven't met anyone that's like, yeah, we shouldn't prosecute this guy. Like you just don't come across that. It's
Once they read them, then they're
so bad. Yeah,
convinced.
you're
Yeah,
not you're
there's just
really
no
not
question.
tricking people. Yeah, it's not like I tell you my age and then you possibly missed it and you continue talking to me. It's nothing like that,
Right.
remotely like that. So
Yeah.
It's yeah, we have, there's a lot of training involved in it to kind of get to a position where you're confident that you can build a good case where, in terms of chatting and responding and getting them to agree to stuff like that. You're really just making it available. And then they're the ones that are initiating and leading it and you're just kind of going along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can resist. Like I found that that is like because sometimes they suspect you're law enforcement. They're afraid, right? Because they're well aware that what they're doing is very bad. And so like sometimes I remember in the past I'd like it'd be like Friday afternoon and I'm like I just don't want to deal with this guy right now
Yeah.
and people want to meet up and I'd be like it's like the weekend and I'm just like I know I'll get this guy like Monday or Tuesday so I'd like intentionally say oh I'm not available and that would actually like really solidify the cases usually because for the bad guys because the bad guys would be like oh this is definitely not law enforcement like the law enforcement would arrest me right away
Oh.
well, they would be even more eager, in my experience.
Oh.
If I'm the one that says no initially, like that's pretty good in
Yeah.
my experience. Like um,
Yeah. You're not jumping on it.
you're set up like with a sting, and you have like you rented a house or something, an Airbnb or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you have some resources committed, like you're probably not going to do that. But a lot of times I would just do these like out of my office and I would like have an agreement with the hotel or I'd usually, if it's like a child, I wouldn't actually use the hotel. I would be more like, hey, come pick me up and I'll sneak out. My grandma's like here, but she's sleeping. I'll just sneak out and I'll meet you, in some public space. And so you have them go to a specific spot. And you usually, maybe half the time, you know exactly who it is before they arrive because they're using their real phone. They're sending you pictures of their face or their tattoo. But sometimes they'll send a picture of their license plate. Like, look at this cool car or motorcycle I have. I'm gonna pick you up in. You're like, okay, I'm gonna run that plate.
Bingo.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like, you know who it is.
Hmm.
Or you get their voice recording, like you make phone calls with them.
And do
Like,
you find this personality is there I don't know if you can generalize this way, but that because the drive is very strong, they will take steps that become unwise at a certain point, and that is there like a line that you know to look out for, like how can ask what I'm trying to ask? Uh, it just seems like this personality is can be an obsessive type, and I wonder if that affects how that cat and mouse game
Mhm.
goes.
Yeah,
Because
I
they at a certain point
suspect.
they can't stop, or they're gonna fall for it because they're driven kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. I suspect that a lot of them are probably addicted to
Yeah,
like
there's a good word.
pornography, and it's
Right.
kind of like they probably use it like a drug, where they're no longer getting that high, that normal high from
Yeah.
using viewing the normal stuff, and so they slowly get into more crazy fetish, taboo things, and then they go into viewing that stuff and then that's not enough, and so then they pursue that, worse drug, right? And so then they end up with trying to meet a child, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that is a lot of probably what's happening. I don't know exactly that's the case for all of these guys that I arrested, but in a lot of our trainings, that's usually what's pointed to. Like, there's been a lot of in-depth interviews done with some of these kind of guys, and that is a pattern that has been noted. Again, it doesn't mean like all of them. That doesn't mean that describes all of them that get caught,
Right.
but it's there's probably something there with that. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I don't know the psychology, but I'm sort of
Yeah, and
just
you do feel bad for them. Like I view it as a very evil act, and there's like good things that they do. Like they're not completely.
right. Well,
They
and
have families sometimes. A lot of times,
absolutely,
actually,
yeah, that they
but
support.
yeah, there's a few guys that come to mind that had families, and you feel bad for the families for sure.
Yeah.
So they're
I was listening to an interview with a couple of women who had been trafficked, and they were
Mhm.
both saying that, and I've heard this before, it seems that it becomes generational. And so their grandparents had trafficked their parents, and their parents are trafficking them. And you get to about three generations, and it becomes like almost a matter of course. Um, and
Yeah,
the
I've heard of that.
I
I've
mean,
heard of
that's the parent trafficking the child. That's different from the, what you're talking about. But it's
mm,
related because uh, it's part of the equation. I was just looking at the psychology of the whole thing, which is puzzling.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it can there can be a cultural aspect to some of that trafficking stuff where especially with the traffickers, like a lot of times that's generational too.
Yeah. hmm
Traffic. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like it's just okay because that's just what's done. And if you're born into that, again, speaking of the traffickers, people who traffic their own children, for instance, and this is adjacent to what you're talking about, it's just a strange part of human society that's becoming people are getting more and more aware of,
mhm.
and as people are, the question comes up like how and why because it's so anti-human, you know. Um,
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Yeah, the trafficking cases are like the hardest ones because your victim in that, the usually the girl, like the escort that's being trafficked, right? Like that's what they're being forced to be as an escort.
yeah,
They're usually brainwashed and
yeah,
completely controlled and manipulated by the trafficker, and they're your victim. And so you have cases where it's really, really difficult to identify them. Like they're not going to be compliant.
right. Okay, so
Not
this
going
is
to
what
rely on, it's really hard to rely on their testimony because,
right. So this is part of what I was learning is that by about the third generation that the brainwashing is so complete that that any kind of MK Ultra that's being imposed on that person is very easily received.
yeah, I mean, uh, my understanding is that like the brainwashing can happen really with anyone. Like
Yeah.
there really there can be really smooth traffickers that I mean I can think of a lot of women that I've met that were trafficked or
hmm
their stories, and they were like they seemed very normal
Right.
children. They weren't it wasn't a generational thing
Right.
and got mixed in. But in all those cases, there's always a trafficker in the picture, right? Like there's always some bad actor with really bad influence over them. And a lot of times they trick them, right? It involves them. A lot of times there's romance involved. So they like start out with as a boyfriend, and then they separate them from their family and their support system, and they become completely dependent on the trafficker and
hmm
uh, slowly work them and make them dependent. And they might start small, with giving them having them do things just to pay for like their trip that they're or making it seem it's like it's temporary or and then sometimes it just flat out involves violence from the get-go where they might have a child. It's like if you don't do this, then I'm going to traffic your sister
Right.
or
Right.
you have your
Coercion.
child. Your
Y-
child's here, like
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. And there are people who are more vulnerable. I think there are marks that some people just, I don't know, some people are just predatory and are good at they just intuitively know who
Yeah.
a mark
Yeah.
is. I don't
I've
know how
actually
that
heard
works.
interviews with traffickers that talk about that, where they can point out those girls that they want to that they're confident about getting. Like they can just point them out all.
Yeah.
Pretty sick.
Yeah. It's a strange talent. But
I
so
wouldn't
well
recommend.
so anyway, getting back to where you're going to be going with this, that's great that you're going to get to do this because you're going to be helping and you're also going to be doing something that you're good at and that you actually really get satisfaction out of because
Yeah.
it's yeah,
You feel like you're doing your part to keep the community safe, right? Like
yeah,
these are really bad. Sometimes they've done it before. Sometimes it's they're just looking for the opportunity, but these are some of them they're trying to commit something that's like the most evil thing to do, right? And they're trying to do it undetected and they're trying to be hidden. And they're out there, they're online, and if I can catch them, And why wouldn't I do that? And it is fun. Like, don't get me wrong. Like it is fun to do it. And it's relatively safe.
Hmm.
I'm pretty doxable. And so I stay armed everywhere I go. But
Yeah.
when I'm doing these missions, I'm like behind a computer and I have a
Yeah.
bunch of computers and phones and
Yeah.
not like kicking doors in. Right.
Right.
I usually have a team set up somewhere that can meet them in person. And every now and then those will be violent, but a lot of times they're not. They're just apprehended and they're crying and they usually confess. I've only had one that didn't.
Hmm.
And so, but your evidence is also so overwhelming, because what you want to do is you want to make sure you have the right person, right? And so you usually are reluctant to give out the exact meetup spot until the very last minute. So it's not possible that I'm like setting you up.
Right. Huh.
Or yeah, you usually do some due diligence there. Or I call the phone that we've been interacting with after I detain you. Like you get detained, you're the bad guy, and then I call the phone I've been interacting with, and your phone lights up with my phone number, and I take pictures of that interaction. Like that's pretty damning.
Right. Hmm.
So, and then the interrogations are pretty good. Like we have like some of these detectives, myself included, were pretty dang good at interrogating. There's a lot of training out there, a lot of classes, courses, a lot of different techniques that you pick up, and it can be really hard to survive an interrogation. If you're like you're probably not gonna win that. Like if you're guilty, I mean.
Uh-huh.
And I've actually interviewed people that were not guilty, and there were mistakes made.
Yep.
And it's like, I think we got the wrong guy.
Oh, and you can
No,
tell.
it can be good. It can be good for them.
I have seen a couple of videos of someone being it was obvious this person had committed this crime and it was a crazy crime. The guy was crazy to like beat someone with a baseball bat to death while they were asleep on the couch. That sort of thing. And was trying to get out of it and all the evidence was there. There's no way he was going to get out of it.
Yeah.
But the questioning was done very deftly in this particular case and just there was no pressure really, but this person was just and guided until suddenly he's admitting it and telling the story, you know? But he
Yeah.
resists and resists for like a good half an hour, telling all these absurd lies that you know are not at all true. And then at some point it turns the corner.
Yeah. The technique I would use a lot was it involves getting the suspect to lie to you right at the beginning. And
Yes,
so
right?
usually that
Okay.
usually involves just saying, "Hey, Carrington, did you commit this heinous crime?" Right? And
Right.
it's a heinous crime, right? And then you don't want to go to jail, so you lie and you say, "No, I didn't." And then when you do that, like in that setting, in front of a detective, and you're like, you're caught, like you're not free to leave, that can build a lot of stress in like a normal person. For the vast majority of us, that'll build up a lot of stress
It's
with
true.
that act.
You'll
And
start to
then
sweat
you,
or something.
yeah, so then the rest of the interview, and it's all an interrogation, but I would divide it up in two. So there'd be the interview and then the interrogation. So the interview part would be get that lie, and then you go into all these different questions that are behavior provoking questions.
Mhm.
And so for an example, it would be like, Carrington, say that your crime was murder, or
Okay.
let's pick something less severe, like stealing a car. Like Carrington, whoever did steal this car, what do you think should happen to them? And then
Oh.
if you did it, like a lot of times the guilty person would say things, they would minimize the punishment. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times the guilty person will say things like, I think they should get re-educated, maybe get on probation, a fine, community service. And then the not guilty people, like normal people, would usually say like, throw the book at them, throw them
Mhm.
in jail, cut off their hands, something
Mhm.
crazy,
Mhm.
especially if it's a really heinous crime, like child related stuff. Usually people will flat out say, kill them.
Wow.
And then the guilty person would be like, well, there's probably something wrong with them psychologically and they need to be re-educated, whatever.
Mm.
They go through therapy, right? So there's some like extreme examples, like with the child related crimes. Usually you see like extremes. in those kind of responses, but you have a bunch of these behavior provoking questions, not just one or two. And then and they're specific. Like I can't recall all of them right now, but that's an example of one. And what you'll see is that guilty people usually respond a certain way, and not guilty usually respond a certain way. And if you look at your notes and like all your behavior provoking questions, like you had 12 of them and 10 of them, they gave a guilty response, you're kind of like, okay, I think I have the right guy. So you kind of use that to inform you. And then usually in that interview phase, they'll say things that will lead you to the interrogation. So, for example, they'll give you a theme to work with. So, this is actually a real life story where I was interrogating this guy who shot up a house, and no one was in the house. But he shot up the house he shot through the windows and stuff. And I did not have anything on him, but he was a suspect. He was like an ex-boyfriend, right? He was the suspect. He wasn't in my custody. I had no evidence against him. He didn't even have to talk to me. He could just walk away. And he totally understood. I was on his front porch and I'm just interviewing him on his front porch and he's not in custody. I'm just talking to him, man to man. And we're just sitting down facing each other. And I gave him this interview. And in the theme that I saw throughout this interview was he did not like thieves. I got that from him. Like through the course of our conversation and questions, I learned from him that he did not like stealing. He did not like thieves. He hated them. Now, my crime investigating has nothing to do with stealing any property. But what I said was so at one point, but he was giving me all the guilty signs for he shot up this house. And so what I did when I transitioned to my interrogation was I said, hold on one second. And I dropped the CD on the ground along with some paperwork. And the CD was blank, had nothing on it. But what was written physically on it was video surveillance footage and like his name or something like that, right? And so I just throw that on the ground. And so I actually was recording the whole thing. You can see him lean forward and you can see him mouth the words video surveillance footage. And he kind of just sits back and his whole atmosphere kind of changes, right? And then I went into the interrogation mode. In interrogation mode, I'm just asking question, question, question. I'm not really letting him talk. I'm letting him respond, but I'm kind of cutting him off when he's trying to refute me. So for example, what I started to say is like, hey man, we know a lot more than what I put on it originally. And I have video surveillance footage, I have this, and I'm BSing him. And I'm just
Yep.
like, I go, here's what I want to know, man. And I gave him this is called an alternative question. And I used what I learned in the interview this is how I determined what my alternative question would be. But my alternative question for him was, I know that you shot the house up. Like I saw it on the video surveillance footage. But what I don't know is there's some stuff missing from inside the house. Did you also go in the house and steal some stuff? Now I know that you shot. So what I'm doing
Right.
is there option A or option B? Option A is you just shot up the house.
Right.
Option B is you shot up the house and stole stuff. And I knew that he hated the idea of him being a thief so much that he was just so upset about that. So he obviously ended up confessing to option A. But the whole point of this is called the read technique, is you're building their stress up and you and then especially when you're in interrogation phase where I'm accusing them, their stress level is so high that the only way for them to relieve that stress is to confess. And it's the weirdest thing. So
Oh, okay.
picture it as
So
like
they're looking
right
for a
now
release at that point. They're looking.
their fear of being going to jail is like here, and their fear of and their stress levels like here. But then eventually that stress level overwhelms their fear of going to jail and they just confess. And you can literally, I remember that guy was actually stood up and started pacing there on his porch just to relieve the stress. Because like you relieve your stress through physical means, like that's the most efficient. That's why like you don't have interrogation chairs with that swivel or move. Like you want them to stay put. But neat little technique there too. But yeah, that was one where I used the interview to inform my theme for when I was accusing him. And the alternative question in general will be they're both confessions. And that typically won't work on someone that's not guilty. Like you're not going to admit that you shot up a house. If you didn't
Yeah, if you
shoot,
didn't do it, it doesn't
you're
matter.
gonna,
No,
yeah.
I didn't shoot it up and I didn't steal
Yeah.
anything. And
And
I'd
if
be
I
like,
told you that I have video surveillance footage that says you did, that shows me you did, you wouldn't believe it because you didn't do it.
because
Like
you didn't do it.
none
So
of that
that's
works
simple.
on you because
Yeah.
you're not. you're innocent, right? And
Right. But
so
if you
those are
did,
great
you,
things.
yeah, right. If you did, that footage may be there or may not be there, but you don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
you
and, in that case, that guy confessed. He explained that he only shot at the house, and then I became like, well, why did you do that? What was motivating you to do that? And all of that is like stress relieving. He just kind of can talk about it. It's like almost therapeutic,
yeah.
and he elaborates on the details of his crime that he committed. And then,
Oh,
and actually on that one, I didn't even take him to jail. I was just like, all right, well, thank you. And I just let him go. I didn't even arrest him. He showed up, he got summoned, to court later. And I remember he shook my hand after he took a plea deal and he shook my hand afterwards. It's kind of like, that's how, that was good police work,
right,
right?
right.
And the victim was happy.
That's funny. So, well, I guess mm, there's so much we could talk about. I feel like there might be a separate session because we could talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin veterans. But I like where we've been going with this conversation. So, and this could be also something, as you said earlier, we could return to as you get further into your reserve job. But to kind of put a bow on it, I want to return to the um, libertarian thing, and I that's not my favorite word. It's kind of a replacement word. Anytime you apply something, a political term, to an entire set of values and belief and way of life, there isn't really a good word for it, but we're going to use that one.
Yeah.
Um, what you said that when you came into the out of the service and onto the police force and had served for a while in that capacity, that it increased your well, I'm going to call it love of liberty. It sounds to me like that's what, or appreciation of it, or respect for it, or can you just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at history and see all sorts of examples of where you have lack of liberty. There's chaos. Like you have, I mean, when I think of lack of liberty, I imagine like great state power committing atrocities and genocide. Like that's what I think of when I think lack of liberty.
Yeah,
And so if you don't like that kind of stuff, it seems like the opposite of that is more liberty in your community and your society. And so that's what is appealing to me with liberty. There are things with liberty though where because I'm a Christian and there are some like just outright degeneracy that it's like that kind of comes with people being free, but it's
hmm
kind of like, well, I'd rather have that than, extreme state power and censorship, right? Like, degeneracy is probably not going to kill me, but
right, right,
I might just have to shield the eyes of my kids when I pass by folks. Just
right. We did touch on that when I met with you that time. Yeah, there's
yeah,
certain things you just like, yeah, you don't
and
need to
then
see that.
yeah, and I do like the idea of like more local control, local power
Yeah,
over state and federal power. Because I do think about my own community where there is like sort of a lack of rules and there's more libertarian or should say lack of laws and regulations that are really enforced. It's more like there are certainly rules that are misunderstood and they're sort of enforced by the community. And I think that this kind of community would like if you're really out of line, like someone's probably gonna put their hands on you.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
there are certainly rules, in that regard. And there is like a part of that's appealing to me, not having like the state being the enforcer of everything. I like the idea
yeah,
of like my neighbors around my hotel, for example, like we kind of have this unspoken rule where I'm not going to park in front of your building, so you're not going to park in front of mine. We never even talked about this, but it's
right.
just kind
This
of
is just respect. I mean, this
yeah,
sounds like mutual
respect and
respect.
courtesy.
Hmm
Yeah, and if we've never really had a we've never really crossed that line with each other, but there's like those kind of rules. We didn't really need the city to come in and say we're going to have parking rules
Yeah,
and parking enforcement
right.
and business hour parking and stuff like that. So I kind of like where you go towards local control, people kind of voluntarily working together rather than just the heavy hand of law and the state.
hmm
That's kind of what comes to my mind with like loving liberty. Um, And then sometimes there are some things though that I believe in that kind of conflict with that. Like even with these undercover trafficking stings or undercover luring stings, those are examples of cases where there's not really a victim. Like in those cases, the state is considered the victim. There's not really a child involved in that, right? It's really just us finding people that think they're committing a crime against a child. And it's
Oh, yeah, right.
like, how does that
That's
fit?
that's
Like,
interesting.
are they,
Yeah.
are they perceived as a threat and they're acting out and they're dangerous to the community, and that's kind of how you're spinning it? Or, how do you justify that? Like, I kind of view it as like they're trying to commit really evil acts, and I'm trying to detect it before they use it on a real child. And I'm okay with that. Now, do I have that? Does that conflict with some of my libertarian ideals? Maybe, I don't really know. And then another thing I went through, I used to be very involved with my libertarian party locally and at the state level. And then I quit eventually. And what I realized was that I would talk about the idea of the non-aggression principle, where you just kind of stick to yourself, you don't aggress against other people, you don't harm other people,
Yeah.
and you don't violate other people's like personal property rights and private property, or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of that because I can kind of live my conservative Christian lifestyle, and I can be an example. I can try to live my life as an example and encourage that, but I'm not going to force that on you.
Yeah, that's a live and let live
Yeah,
approach.
so I like that. And I
Hmm.
thought that could apply to a lot of things. But then the issue would come up a lot with um, hormone replacement therapy and that kind of stuff for children and all the trans stuff with children specifically. And I saw like people in my camp look at that and be like, I think that's probably child abuse. And like we should probably interfere with that and stop parents and doctors and people doing that. Like that's child abuse.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah. Yeah.
think like the solution is violence.
Yeah, there's a
Some form
line.
of violence. And then there are other libertarians in the party that would
Yeah.
have the opposite opinion. They'd be like, this is between the parent and the doctor and the child, and we should not interfere at all. And it's like these are like opposite opinions, and some of them would like champion it and applaud it and think it's lovely. And whether no matter what camp you or your listeners are on, it's kind of like how did we come to these complete opposite conclusions with this principle? And then what I realized was that I don't really use the non-aggression principle as my like guiding ethic. It's like my Christian ethics actually is what I really live on
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
my life is dependent on. And it
Hmm.
just so happens that a lot of times my Christian ethics coincide with non-aggression principle.
Hmm. It
But
says a
that
lot about
was
Christianity, really. So,
yeah, and
yeah.
there's a lot of examples from the New Testament, for example, that kind of encourage that sort of non-aggression principle ideology. But
But he also flipped the tables, in the
yeah.
temple. I mean, there's
Yeah,
a
those
line.
money exchangers,
Yeah.
I think Jesus probably would have been a Bitcoiner, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
well, he was a tough
What did he
guy
do?
for sure. He was a really tough guy. So I think, it would be
He's a radical for sure.
yeah,
Have you
yeah.
seen that show, The Chosen?
I've seen parts of that.
Yeah, I would encourage it. Watching the whole thing, I watched that, and it's really cool perspective on the whole Jesus story. I thought
Hmm.
because it really puts it in your face that he was sort of a rebel and
Yes.
he was ornery and he was like causing all sorts of ruckus and
Yeah.
really made the authorities upset. And I admire that too. I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I
he
don't know.
was a leader. He wasn't just like, saying he wasn't a guru. There's a difference. He was definitely a radical prophet, dude. And I think
It's
really
like a
tough.
peaceful revolution, like Bitcoin. So it's
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's
Well,
kind of where I came around on libertarian. Like I still say that I'm a libertarian, but I
mhm.
I kind of I don't know where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm not a
No,
anything,
I
so
I just know that like there's certain things I think are evil and wrong should be opposed, and I don't necessarily I do acknowledge that some of those might not be libertarian.
well, you know what your creed is, what your beliefs are, and what your values are, and whether it has a name or not, I think is probably immaterial. But I was interested in how, the evolution of your thinking, from the military and into law enforcement. It's a very common path in my limited experience, but
I agree with you actually, and I think some of that is like you just work in government long enough, you kind of see how worthless it can be and
Ugh,
inefficient and horrible it can be.
yeah.
So that might be an element of it too. It's like, I think this wouldn't be a problem if like a private company was doing this. Like,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
assuming like the resources and it takes so much time to do this. Like, if a for-profit business did this, right? There's all sorts of scenarios I can think of where it could have been so much more efficient if it was just a lot could be accomplished by private business, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
A
Well,
lot
and
of,
that is a libertarian view. That is,
yeah,
that's free enterprise, that's free market Austrian economics right there.
absolutely.
So, well, that's another discussion that I think I really look forward to having with you. Is there anywhere you want to point them at this point, or
Yeah, my contact info is at west.report. That's my website if anyone needs to contact me for any reason. But
okay?
yeah, that's really all I got.
Okay, well, you might wind up with some fans contacting you just because. We'll
Okay.
see. Well, I that was really interesting stuff. Thank you so much. You're just a really great person to have for me on this show because this is so much of what I'm, about. From when it comes to like the truly 3D human experience. So, folks, thanks for being with us. This has been Travis West. What an awesome guy. I'm Carrington MacDuffie. This is Starseeds of Freedom.